This to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly grew into business.
Still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty
We
mind-boggling.
can't just believe that it was the work of these lone troubled individuals.
And we're back, guys, on Conspirinormal, and someone else is back. He's finally recovered.
I'm here, mostly recovered.
Yeah, and we got like a whole like new awesome setup. We got like a screen.
Oh yeah, we got the
And-
projector.
You've got a whole new sound system in here. Like
Yep.
a whole new recording. Everything's new.
Bunch of new gear, bunch of cool new stuff. We got new squirrels.
Yes.
It's awesome.
Yes, you have adopted squirrels.
Alyssa adopted squirrels. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that's true.
I found the squirrels.
Unfortunately, right?
Oh.
You're raising those Illuminati squirrels.
I told her that I want you to understand, Alyssa, that we are raising the orphans of our enemies right now.
That's true.
It was their parents that chewed holes in the roof, and that's why we have to replace the roof. But
You have to be nice to all animals.
yes, we will raise them and release them far, far away from here.
Yes.
So what does that entail? What are you raising? How are you raising them?
It entails me, after a long labor day of working, stopping at PetSmart and buying a bunch of syringes and little dropper bottles with nipple tips and formula and all this stuff, only to find out that they can eat whatever the hell we throw in the cage for them. And now they're just eating stuff. And
They were wild?
oh, they fell out of the ceiling. Yeah.
Well, our guest here is Bernie Taylor. Bernie, before we kind of formally introduce you, do you know anything about the care of squirrels?
No, I was thinking you guys were talking about squirrels, that he's got all new wiring that's all wrapped up under the desk.
Oh, that too. But no, real squirrels.
No.
Because I know that you're a naturalist. I didn't know whether this you might have any advice for Rob or.
No, that might be something out in Tennessee. Being we have some different squirrels out here in Oregon.
Yeah, I was in San Diego not too long ago. Squirrels out in California look really weird.
Yeah. What's interesting is that if you have a rat in the home, or actually a rat anywhere in the neighborhood, everybody screams, right? You got to get rid of the rats. It's an infestation. But if a squirrel, which is another similar rodent, is bounding around, oh my God, it's so cute.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's my point. The tree rats.
That's right.
It's pretty much true. And Sir Fiel is here. Say hello to everybody, sir.
Hello.
He's not having to produce this week.
No.
Feels really good.
Feels very good.
Yeah, please don't die on us though.
Trying
Sir
to
Fiel.
relax, yeah.
So, guys, I'm really excited about this guest. I heard this guest on Where Did the Road Go and also on Gralien Report. And his name is Bernie Taylor. And he has some interesting ideas about ancient astronomy and some ideas about how this kind of ancient knowledge came down to us that does nothing to do with A, either ancient aliens, or B, something like Atlantis. But before we get into that, Bernie, I kind of want to define, because you describe yourself as a naturalist, and I kind of want to define what that is and how being that lends significance to your work, how it influences your work now.
Absolutely. So the most famous naturalists that we know are Darwin, Jane Goodall, Teddy Roosevelt, and John Muir. Later, Roosevelt became a president. John Muir became the founder of the Sierra Club. Goodall became a primatologist, and Darwin became a evolutionary scientist. Okay. But they all started by spending time in the field, in the woods and on the water, and they experienced nature from being immersed in nature. So in my experience was to spend a lot of time fishing and hunting, and being out in the woods for when I used to bow hunt, And bow hunters, you'll spend days just sitting in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're sitting in the woods, you see a lot of things going around you. You see the change of light and darkness throughout the day. You see the animals in your environment. And that my experiences out in the wood led me to write 2 previous books. And the last book I wrote was titled Biological Time. And in Biological Time, I asked a question that everybody who sits out in the woods or spends time in the water asks. How do these animals know because they move around during the day. So the elk are one place, in the morning, a different place in the afternoon. How do they know to do that? Or the salmon spend the juvenile, time, maybe a year or so in the fresh water. They go out to the sea, they come back again. It's all synchronized.
Sure.
Is there one smart salmon that they all follow? Or is there something that commonly cues them? And so the Darwin asked similar types of questions. He gathered specimens and he saw differences in birds. And he said, how can I explain this? And so I approached my time spending out in the woods and the water. I went back to the libraries, to university libraries and to the primary literature. And I asked these questions of how does a salmon know, how do they all do it in synchrony? Because I'm here out in Oregon and the salmon are earlier or later from one year to the next. But they're always earlier or later together, okay? And early or later could be a month and a half. It has nothing to do with whether the water's high or low. It makes no difference because they have to actually stage out in the bays before they come in. So as a naturalist, from my perspective, is someone who started in the land and then looked for answers, how it all works. Native Americans would have been naturalists. They looked at the entire picture of the world around them. They didn't look through a microscope. They looked at the light and the darkness of the day and the night. They looked at animals in synchrony with each other and how they related. And they looked at the weather, and they looked at themselves. And they looked at themselves and how they project their own psyche into these animal beings. So that's how I see that's my view as a naturalist. And I will never be a John Muir, Goodall, Teddy Roosevelt, or Charles Darwin. But I'm proud to be in such a path of being a naturalist.
Sure. It's interesting that you say that because one of the things that you always hear is, well, they know that because of instinct, but then nobody really asks the question, well, what is instinct?
Exactly. And that's something we're going to go into today. We'll talk about instinct further, but I'm going to explain how it worked with the salmon because it's just like 1 minute. If you go to Alaska during the summertime, it's almost 24. It's 24 hours light. You get off the airplane and you're moving about, and you're probably not going to sleep the first night because the lights are on unless you can completely shut it off. And you'll probably go fishing or hunting, whatever it is, through that whole cycle of light. You might even go 2 or 3 days without sleeping, maybe taking a little cat nap during the day after you have a beer. And what happens is that it's the light that puts this – actually, it's the light wakes us up and the darkness puts us to sleep. It's very simple. And
right.
And in people in Alaska in the wintertime, they're typically groggy because they have that constant melatonin, which is synthesized in the darkness. Well, salmon are just the opposite. Salmon migrate in the darkness, and they slow down in the light. And the light is not just the sun, but it's also the moon. So around a full moon, the salmon don't migrate. They stick where they are. And so if you look at the migration of the salmon, both to the ocean and back again, they during the darkest nights around the new moon, they migrate prolifically. They slow down around the full moon. It's got these, the curves are pretty obvious. And that's what part of the work I did in Biological Time. But here's the sticker, okay? So the migrating by the sun and the moon, not rocket science. The cycle of the moon is 29.5 days. 12 times 29.5 is 11 days short of 365. So if they migrate on a new moon on January 12th, they're migrating up the river. Year one, it'll be January 1st the next year. And the reason why the salmon are early or later for one year next is because that they're tied to the moon and the sun, which are out of synchrony with each other. And it's the same effect goes with migratory birds and other animals. And I asked, when I figured this out, because people had done a lot of work on lunar events of animals, but what they didn't do is they didn't ask that same question of why they're earlier or later. And so I looked at the literature and all this sort of stuff. It just wasn't there. And I contacted someone who does this for a living, and his name is John Palmer, and he's a chronobiologist, studied biological clocks. And he had silence. I asked him the question: if you put these two together, has anybody written about that? He had silence on the end of the phone. And Palmer, he said, I can't believe we missed that. And Palmer had, he was fairly famous for putting the first, demonstrating that animals were affected by magnetism, which went on for MRIs and so on. He was the founder of that whole thing. But I said that, even though Palmer didn't know it, a very bright guy, someone else might have known it. And I went to look at Native American calendars and calendars of people in the ancients in the Middle East. And I found that their entire food program, when they were going to catch migratory fish, for example, was tied to a lunar calendar. And so their lives revolved around these lunar calendars, which told them where they would be for any animals. And even if they were, sedentary farmers, they still went to the rivers to catch the fish, which was in their calendars. And you go through religious calendars, the Christian, the Muslim, and so on. Right. They're all lunar calendars. Right. And so they're tied to feasts of animals such as fish. And so when I did that, I wrapped it up, and someone said to me, you got to look further in time. So I went to the cave at Lascaux, looked at images from cave at Lascaux in France from 17,000 years ago, and lo and behold, the nomenclature around these animals was tied exactly to how the Native Americans were doing it in their calendars. And so I wrote the book. I put it out there, did a lot of scientific presentations, papers, all this sort of stuff. Most of it was around salmon because it's a big environmental and industry here in the Northwest. And I did my deal, and I said, well, I'm kind of I'm out there in this. And so I'm going to put it on the shelf for 10 years. And 10 years later, I came back, and I stepped into something I couldn't have imagined, and that is what we now have as Before Orion.
Yeah. So just to kind of encapsulate that, this is with a salmon, this is because of the magnetism, because of the moon, this triggers like a chemical reaction in them with a melatonin, which allows them to migrate. So
if you take the magnetism out of there, you're 100% on. Yeah. So they actually migrate through magnetism, but in terms of their location, but their stop and go is entirely to the sun and the moon, and the two being out of sync with each other, because 365 doesn't divide evenly into 29 half-day lunar cycle, sets them earlier or later from one year to the next.
I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and migratory birds. I went through dozens of species of animals, and all the data was out there in these journals. And they would have these individual events of like, when does a deer rut or so on, but no one actually put the two together. And it was a no-brainer. It's a pretty simple idea. The pieces were all reading the primary literature.
Yeah,
it was just.
So ancient man was able to see this pattern, use this, the cycles of the moon, and knew at this such and such a time we can catch this fish, we can catch this bird, we can, so that is interesting.
It's because they were naturalists.
Yeah. Because
they spent their lifetime, not just days as I did, on the woods and in the water. Or actually, I'm going to say on the water and in the woods. And they saw the world around them and how everything was in synchrony with both the moon and the sun. And they saw it in the stars as well. The stars does not affect the migration of salmon, but birds do migrate with the stars. And that was done many years ago. But they saw all these things, and their cosmos was not looking through a microscope or measuring something in a test tube. Their world was everything around them.
Right.
It was the entire cosmos. By looking at the stars and following the moon and the sun and all the plants and the animals in their world, and this one synchronous cosmos, that was their world, and they were animists. They believed that they could talk to the bears. They believed that they could listen to the wind. They believed that the clouds had a thundered or a voice. That is the mind of the animist. And the people that are in sync with the natural world, which we are not today. When we stock up our fridge with Costco, and if we just not mood to defrost something, we head down to the Thai restaurant to pick up for takeout, which they didn't do. They were in sync with the cosmos, and that's Before Orion takes it even further than this biology that I was looking at before. It was pretty much a quantitative book. A third of it was statistics. It was a scientific work. But when I went into this, about 4 years ago, I got back on track, and I was continuing down the quantitative path, and then I saw something on a cave wall in an image, and I said, "Oh my God, this changes everything." And that set me off in a completely different trajectory of not biological clocks and not about measuring melatonin and salmon and all these sort of things. It was just a showstopper, and it changed the way that I see the world, and that many people have to today. And they now have to. We all have to face this new elephant in the room.
And this cave. Well, tell us about this cave. This is called. Well, I think there's two caves, right?
So I use
Gallery of Discs and the Gorham Cave. Correct.
I primarily use two different images in the book, but I use other ones as well. And the key one we'll kind of do tonight is the Gallery of Discs, which is in the El Castillo Cave. And the El Castillo Cave, at the time I was writing the book, they had found the oldest cave art in the world, which was dated cave art in the world, which is about 40,000 years. They've since dated older stuff at El Castillo. It's in the northern part of Cantabria region of Spain, near the famous Altamira cave. And so this this image had come out of they found and dated these cave art 40,000 years ago, but it took a pretty crappy picture. It was not very good at all. And so the media ran with a different image from another part of the cave. And the oldest cave art in the world was actually a dot, and it's just a red disc about this little small, about the size of the palm of your hand. Well, they found a better picture of discs in the cave. It's called the Gallery of Discs, which has about 80 of them streaming across this 10-meter wide panel. It's a really cool picture. And the media ran with the Gallery of Discs, saying that the oldest cave art in the world was a dot, and they used this better image from the Gallery of Discs. So millions and millions of people had seen it in the media. Same image I used in the book, and hundreds of thousands had been seen it firsthand, because the panel in the cave had been discovered over 100 years ago. Okay. So this was not something like I dug up or new discovery or anything like that. The world had seen this, and everybody did one thing: they looked at the red discs and they asked, well, why do they have these dots?
All right. What was the significance of the dots?
Well, that's what. So the significance of the dots is that they are they're a visual attractor. Okay, and I'll explain to it. It's a quick. Here's a naturalist story. This is going back to this fellow named Nicholas Tinbergen won a Nobel Prize for his work on instinct. And which is your first question you asked, and we're going to get there. And his book was called The Study of Instinct. And Tinbergen, I believe, is in Belgium. Lived in Belgium. He had a red delivery truck come by every day, and every time that truck came by, his fish in the tank went into a defensive posture. Whereas otherwise, they just muddled about during the day, fed, ate, things like that. And so Tinbergen looked at that and he said, "Hey, this is kind of cool. But why did they do it? Because they can't think to do it, because they lack the cerebral hemispheres, which give us cognitive thinking. They're brainstem dominated." And so he said, this is basic instinct. And it's not just the basic instinct with these fish in his tank, but it's why we have red stop signs, or we actually react to the red stop signs. That's why we have them. Why we're attracted to red lipstick and red dresses. If you go down to any main strip, McDonald's and DQ and Burger King all have red in their signs. But the organic stores don't. Just, you probably notice, it'd be kind of green. And so Tinbergen, he popularized this idea. He made a so-called scientific fact, And then Madison Avenue picked it up and through all of our use from advertising. And so I believe that this concept of the red disc on this gallery disc was the exact same as why Tinbergen's fish were reacting to the red delivery truck. It draws out an instinctual reaction. It pulls us to them and asks the question, what's important about these red discs? Which is the same question you just asked. I believe it was a test to the Paleolithic apprentice who came into the cave, he's being tested whether he can be a shaman. And if he only asked that question of what are these red discs and how many are there, as millions of people did, he failed the test. He could never be a shaman.
That was just there to grab whoever's attention.
It grabbed the attention.
And then there was a deeper level.
And there are deeper levels beyond the imagination. And the first animal I saw was as I said, we all have to now face that elephant in the room. And well, it is an elephant. And actually, there's four of them. And we have to face it. There's an elephant. And not only is it's an elephant, but it's an African elephant. There are elephants in Europe at that time, but they have a little humped head. This has a flat head. In all three of the heads you can see that are visible, the profile, they're all flat. And so we have an elephant with a flat head, which is a African elephant in a cave in Spain. It doesn't stack up. So this person, the person who had made this panel, either carried with him or someone carried to him an image of an elephant that person had seen in Africa that wasn't like his elephants in Spain, or the artist himself had seen an elephant. And so I contacted. So it was I looked at this and I looked up all the elephants. I contacted someone from my distant past. I'm 53 now, and I met someone in the mid-20s. His name is George Schaller. Dr. George Schaller. And George is widely recognized as the world's foremost wildlife biologist. And I lived in China in my mid-20s, and I met George when he was doing some work on pandas or snow leopards or something. And George is the mentor to Jane Goodall and everybody else you could possibly imagine. And he's not as public as she is, and he spends most of his time working on big cats, and he's in his mid-80s right now. So I contacted George. He didn't remember me, but I said, hey, can you help me identify this elephant? And so he said, there's three other people that can help you out who are more into these, African big mammals. And so I contacted all three of them. None of them responded back. And I went back to George. Hey, George, they didn't respond. He says, yeah, I get it, because I'm an independent. And so George said, I'll help you out, but I'm not going to write anything. And if you feed me stuff, I'll answer, the questions. Well, a year and a half later, and hundreds of emails, we sort of got to the bottom of it. And not just the elephant per se, but the dozens of other animals in the cave that were both from the Iberian Peninsula, now Spain, Africa, and the Strait of Gibraltar in between them.
And just to be clear, these figures that you're seeing, they're not painted. They're more like chiseled into the rock. Is that correct?
Well, it's a combination. Originally, so this is a limestone wall, and originally it had this had organic and mineral matter just covering the whole thing. And what the Paleolithic artist did was he came in. First thing he started scraping off what he wanted to see, and he created nuances in what's called the mineral matter that's fairly dark. To create features within characters. So he through his scraping, and then he puts some shadowing in with some sort of charcoal, and then he puts the red discs on top of it. And the red discs, for example, he uses them for two eyes of an apprentice. He uses them for the molted pattern of a giraffe. He uses them for the nose of the bottlenose dolphin, which probably doesn't really fit. But he uses them for there's this hero character who's carrying a club, and around the hero character's neck is a pelt, and the pelt is red. So presumably he has killed something with the club that was spotted, so leopard or something, right? This concept. And then there's a woman, a female character, he uses the same discs to create the braiding in her red hair. When we ask what the red discs are, well, they become features in other characters versus the counting of the red discs themselves. It also creates there's a mare horse, and the red disc becomes speckles going down her neck. So there's this artist was brilliant. And we think of brilliant artists, we think of Picasso, Da Vinci, and so on, Andy Warhol, maybe, I don't know. Or Michelangelo. This is the artist who made this, and I believe this was a solo artist for the Gallery of Discs, was light years beyond any of them. I mean, there's nothing like this in modern art or in historical art that we can see. Picasso himself was once asked, to evaluate the cave art at Altamira to see if it was a fake or not. And Picasso came out and said, none of us could have done this. This is the real deal. Wow. He said this is real. Yeah. And so now if you compare Altamira with Altamira with the Gallery of Discs, it's a 1 to 10. Altamira is a 1. Let's say at a 1 to 10, Altamira is a 1. This is a 10. And so this is the artist uses the same characters. He creates 4 elephants out of 1 elephant. He used the same trunk. He used the same trunk 3 times, and the ears 3 times to create 3 elephants. He has this. He transforms characters within a story, and it's phenomenal. And there's absolutely nothing like this. Even in modern visual arts, where people use computers, there's nothing like this. And people had etched, engraved much of this in stone. Therefore, he only did it once. He didn't have redos as we don't have layers as we have in Photoshop. So we're so far beyond what is so possible in this gallery of this image that it's just daunting. It says a few things. One is there is no evolution of man in the last 34,000 years, because we have an artist 34,000 years ago who's far beyond anything we've done. And as I go through the image, I talk about myth and so on. We're still telling the same myths to the detail and the same characters. So we're telling the same stories, and we really haven't moved on that much with that either. And then the third part of it is that these characters on this panel are the animals. The artist portrayed them as being as an empathy. And when I would ask George these questions, basically naturalist questions, chronobiology stuff, biological clocks. And George would come back to me and say, he'd talk about this touching moment between the lynx and her kitten. And I'm like, well, that really wasn't what I was getting at. And, I get 5 or 6 emails like that. Like, okay, what George is saying to me is that based on his experience in the natural environment for most of his life, is that animals are not animals. They're animal beings, just as we're animal beings, and that there's emotional moments between them, and that the Paleolithic artist had captured the same, and that it forces us to rethink about everything that we believe to be true, based on a past that we have no idea about where we came from. I think I answered a few questions there.
Yeah. Well, what is the story that is being portrayed, or is it several different ones at the same time?
So I believe there's one. I think there's one story. Okay. And the fundamental part of the story is there's a boy, an apprentice, who's being told about a journey by the shamanic teacher. The journey's from a boy who travels, a young man who travels from the Iberian Peninsula through across the Strait of Gibraltar and into Africa. And when he goes into Africa, he goes to a specific place. And as I said, I wasn't going to tell you how the book ends, which is the last chapter. Well, I'm not going to do it today. But he goes to a specific place, and that place is in the story. And then he travels back again. And as he goes through in the specific story, all the animals, on one side of the panel are animals from Europe, and the other animals from Spain. I'm sorry, from Africa.
Right.
And the African animals include giraffe, mongoose, these elephants, lions with a lion with a mane, whereas European animals had manes. There's a bunch of others, and in Spain we have the Iberian lynx, we have the speckled mare, which are distinctly for those animals. We have a great auk. These are distinctly European animals versus African animals, and wherever he is, he sees the animals that are on his travels. And so if you got dropped off in an airplane, parachuted out, you don't know where the heck you are, and you land, there's a bunch of pandas around, and you're not in a zoo. Guess where you are?
Where would you
Pandas.
Will you be in China?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, we identify places with the animals that are indigenous to them. Okay, and so this particular boy on his journey, he encounters all these animals, and so he knows where he is, and he goes across Strait of Gibraltar, where there's a seal, there's a bottlenose dolphin, and there's a crab. I'm not sure, and so he. And we can actually see him swimming in the image. Okay. And he goes into Africa. But this is where it gets. So that's like really cool. And it's kind of how people made maps in the distant past. They put the animals on to say where they were. And today, of course, the United States is the eagle, and Russia's the bear, China's the panda, and is it Canada moose?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Probably moose. Yeah. It's a guess, right? Okay, we'll go with it. Now, I'm here in Oregon. We have the beavers. The beaver is a state animal, and so that is like really
mascots,
cool. Mascots, yeah, the mascots,
yeah,
which is really cool.
Totems.
Totem, man, yeah. Totally totem animals. And so it is how we would envision they would have created a map and so forth. But then the next step, it gets really cool. I mean, it goes beyond what anybody could possibly imagine. Well, these animals that we see are actually the same as the Greeks saw the constellations in the night sky. And so the horse, the speckled mare, is Pegasus. And next to Pegasus is an eagle, which is the Aegea, which we have pictured. And we have this huge character of a man, which is Hercules. As we go down, Pisces is the bottlenose dolphin. We have an Orion character at one end. Those two, we have the lion and lioness. The lioness is Gemini, and the lion is, of course, Leo. The great. And then there's bears, which become Ursa Major, and there's a bunch of other ones. But they're all in the exact same spot or the same part as part of the sky as the Greeks also found them in their constellations. Okay, so we have So it's in the Hermetic tradition, the earth and sky became one. And that can be kind of woo-woo. Yeah, people kind of like throw that one out there. It's kind of like woo-woo, and the stars are telling me what to do when I wake up in the morning. And, maybe just before I wake up in the morning when it's dark. Well, in the vision of this artist, the earth and sky were one. They were an animist, as the Native American one were. That when they spent their lifetime out in the real world, they could see that as the stars moved through the night sky, they were in sync with the animals they saw in and around them. And so Ursa Major becomes the bear, the mother bear, and there's two cubs. Well, Ursa Major was not there all year. And so this Ursa Major, how it's positioned in this panel, is a midsummer time frame. Okay, so we can actually date. We can time within the year when this panel is made, mid-June. We can also the eagle is not just an eagle; it's actually a fledgling eagle. It hasn't flown yet. We can see the down on its side; it's about a foot high, which also places it about mid-June. And the lynx kitten again is a mid-June time scene. So what this artist did was, if you were to look out your window and paint a picture, you do something. There'd be some green out there. Maybe a blue jay. You got your wacky squirrels. If you would do the same picture in January, well, I'm not sure what it's like in Tennessee, but maybe it's not as green. Maybe that wacky squirrel isn't going around, and maybe you have some other animals in the environment that you wouldn't have done otherwise.
I think squirrels are the official totem animal of Conspirinormal now.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, this is we have to look at all. We're going to look at life through squirrels from now on, and so that is your world today is different from the world you're going to see in January. And so this artist, he created the world that he saw in that time, in this mid-June time frame, which is not just the earth, but also the stars above them. And he projected those animals from his psyche, the patterning of them, into the night sky to make the constellations that the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Babylonians, and the people of Sahara today still use today. And for the Greeks, I mean, they've got the whole. It is their catalog of constellations.
So I wanted to ask you this about the constellations, because you always hear that about that they were made by the Greeks, but obviously
Correct.
there is a much earlier root to this. So is the root so far back into ancient times that really we shouldn't attribute them to the Greeks?
Well, we can actually learn a lot. We can, if we look at constellations around the world among indigenous peoples. Native Americans, not all Native Americans, but enough Americans saw Orion as a man. They saw Pleiades as a group of people, and they saw Sirius as a dog. Okay,
Orion is one of the most obvious ones.
Because we can see, we ourselves can see the pattern of a man in the night sky.
Right.
But we don't see a pattern of a dog in Sirius. It's just a bright star. And Ursa Major does look like a legged animal. Okay. But when you go into Siberia and other places, and even in Australia, you find Orion as a man, and you find Sirius as a dog. Around the world, you find those three are common. So there was a time when those were when we must have all those constellations all came from the same place. So somewhere deep in time. But what the Native Americans don't have is a bunch of these animals that we have in the Gallery of Discs. And partly because Native Americans, when we arrived, didn't have horses. They didn't have Iberian lynxes. They had eagles, but they didn't have giraffes, and they didn't have elephants. Okay?
There was nothing to equate them to.
Exactly. Yeah. So they projected other animals in their world into the night skies constellations. Okay. So, but we can do is 34,000 years ago, we can say that there was this original group of constellations, this catalog that was, it's set in stone, and it works. The astronomy all works out. And I would say that the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, and the Babylonians and the Romans had actually been to this cave and others. And when they went to these caves, they looked at these. They found a bunch of characters, and they easily recognized Orion, because that's the first one you're gonna figure out. And they figured out Pegasus. They saw Orion. They saw Ursa Major. They didn't have. There's not a dog in this one, but there's a dog. There's dogs in other ones in the place of Sirius. And so they found enough of them. They said, okay, we've got these are constellations. And then they took the characters as they saw them to fill them out in their own catalog. And so the Greeks did not invent the constellations as we found in the Almagest from Ptolemy. What the Greeks did was they wholesale lifted it to the Paleolithic record. And there's a lot of you talk about ancient aliens and the Anunnaki and ayahuasca, and you can go through all these A's. There's a bunch of them out there. And what these or Atlantis, and what people are there's anomalies out there. And the big anomaly is that civilizations or knowledge seem to have just come out of nowhere. So the ancient Egyptians, for one, okay, and they've said, well, things just don't come out of nowhere. They must have come from someplace. And so what this image shows us is that there was this knowledge from someplace, and it was a very deep in time, 34,000 years ago. And we can between the Greeks, the Greeks and the Babylonians, they had a fairly the Greeks is more complete. The Babylonians is fairly complete. They had all this fundamentally the same constellation, the zodiacal constellations, but we can see them in this panel, and so their knowledge didn't come out of somewhere. They lifted it from these images. So there was some sort of a period of time between when they saw these cave images that they had they didn't have the complete. They had constellations, but they didn't have the complete picture as we have it today. Because if everybody had continued the line for 34,000 years ago, everybody in the Mediterranean who has these same animals would have the same constellations. But all of a sudden they pop up with the Phoenicians, the Phoenicians, Babylonians, the Egyptians, and the Greeks. And there's some very specific characters in here that tie into myths of people and architecture that archaeological evidence that we can see that are directly to cultures that you just couldn't make up the thing. And in the second chapter, I talk about the myth of the Amazigh people, the so-called Berber people in Sahara, about an interrelationship between an elephant and elephants and women and a hero. And that image, that story, is just laid out in such a way that it's something you wouldn't make up. So the Tuareg, or these Amazigh Berber people of the Sahara, had been to this cave sometime in the distant past, and then they still tell that myth today. The ancient Egyptians found the Giza Sphinx image on this panel because it's identical. And so the face of the Sphinx, and it's just above the lion Leo. So the Giza Sphinx is the lion, comes from the lion Leo. Okay, we can now say it because we can see the source of it, and the Sphinx has the Nemes cloth in the back, all that sort of stuff.
So you see this as kind of like an ancient, almost the root of all this mythology.
It's the root of it is a root back to at least 34,000 years ago, to fundamentally everything we have in the Mediterranean, and I would say into North America. I don't know about South America. Definitely into North America, because I haven't seen all the South American myths. North America, throughout Siberia, into Saharan Africa. I can't say sub-Saharan, but definitely Saharan Africa, and I believe that the Australian myths came from a deeper point, a deeper root on the tree than this image. And so the Australians, they have Orion and some other characters, but they don't have this repertoire. So I would say that 2/3 of the world comes from their mythology. The idiosyncrasies of their mythology comes from these panels.
From this one site, or are there different sites?
In the book, I do 2 major panels, and I do pieces of others, but I've seen other ones that are not in the book.
Yeah.
They could have seen any of these and this is the most this gallery disc is the most comprehensive one that I can identify. But there's other ones that have a lot of these pieces as well. But I'm going to go with the gallery disc was, as far as we know today, is the earliest encyclopedia of sorts, or book of the animists that we can identify.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's
fascinating.
Yeah, well, we hear, people. You've had people on your shows, and you've heard about others, and they talk about ancient aliens, and Anunnaki, and Atlantis, and ayahuasca, and all these sort of things. Yeah. And they're asking a question of, where do we come from? What did we forget, and how did we find it again? And they made their hypotheses. They're not truths, but now we can look back and check their hypotheses with what we can see, where we can see the record now, and we could I would, over time, the whole Atlantis thing, in terms of it being a start of a civilization, it's now Atlantis 12,000 years ago, whatever, is now a moot point. It's history, and ancient aliens trying to point everything. This one's that one's done too. But what we have now is something even better. We have this ancient encyclopedia, and there's others in different caves that we can really see our past and see where we come from. But we can also see, well, why the heck didn't we see this? Why didn't millions of people and hundreds of thousands of people have been in the cave, seen this panel? How come they didn't see it? And what can we learn from this about ourselves, our own educational systems, and how we view the cosmos?
Well, I think that's
bigger questions, and a more interesting place to expand than ancient aliens and ayahuasca and these sort of things.
Reading your book and listening to you on the podcast, listening to you now, it reminds me of something that occurred to me when I was in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History last year. And there was a little display about cave paintings. And a thought just flashed into my head out of nowhere that just said, this was Eden. And essentially that's kind of what you're describing, is this root place that has had a lot of influence on humanity, whether we know it or not.
So this is without telling you how the book ends, because we agreed on that before the show.
Yeah.
This isn't the root.
Uh-huh.
This isn't the root. And there was a root before this. And this gallery of discs is a copy. But you have to take that journey through the book. You have to, because as you went through the book, you'd read a few pages and you're like, oh, this is really cool. Now I got it, right? And then then I throw some other images at you that you're like, oh my God, well, how come I didn't see that? How come I didn't think about that? So you're as you go through the book, you're taking the journey of the apprentice, and you're not really ready for the root of the root until you get to the end. And I wasn't ready either. And so I hope you don't skip ahead in your Kindle to the end, that you continue reading it through. But the gallery of discs is not the root. And you actually know where the root is. You've heard this root so many times. And when you get there, you're going to like hit your head, hair on your head. You're going to drop your mic and you're going to say, oh my God, how come I didn't see this?
Interesting.
It's all there.
Let's talk a little bit about the hero monomyth.
Sure.
Because this fits in with this. And I've always
you're doing right. It takes the hero to the end, I'm telling you.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated with the hero monomyth. And you see there's a root here with that as well. The Joseph Campbell stuff. Which he didn't create. He just popularized it, obviously. But hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so how I see the hero's journey is really, because Joseph Campbell came with like 12 steps. Okay, but it's fundamentally an individual. We'll call it the juvenile salmon. This 3 or 4 inch salmon that is it starts in the headwaters and it swims past its home out into the great ocean. And when it's out in the great ocean, it comes across its trials and tribulations, and it escapes from the bigger fish and so on, and it matures. And when it matures, it comes back to its own headwaters to restart the cycle over again. Well, in the human imagination, animists would have talked about it as a journey of the salmon, but in today's time, we talk about it in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker is in his home in his natal waters, and he leaves. He's drawn away from the normality of his mushroom farm, and he goes on this quest. And on this quest, he has what's called spiritual helpers. So Yoda, Obi-Wan. And they give him gifts, and one of the gifts is the learning how to go inside the Force and how to harness the Force and stay on the light side of the Force. And he meets other characters, odd people, Chewie and Han Solo, CP3O and R2-D2, and these characters all assist him on his journey. And of course, there's a damsel in distress that he saves, sort of, was Leia. Well, she was perfectly capable of saving herself. And so he goes, and then he ultimately comes to face himself, which is in the last movie. But we're going to talk about it. We'll talk about the second movie instead. In the second movie, he goes into the Dogaba cave, And Yoda said, he asks Yoda, what do I need to bring in there? And Yoda says, the only thing you need to bring to the cave is yourself. And he goes into the cave, and he's got his lightsaber, and he actually, Darth Vader pops up. He starts fighting Darth Vader, and he lobs off the helmet of Darth Vader. It falls to the ground, and in that helmet, he sees his own image. And what George Lucas is telling us is that if you fight with the evil out of hate and out of revenge, you yourself will become that same evil. And that's so that is the theme. Luke, a number of times in the story, has a chance to kill Darth Vader, but he doesn't actually do it. And he faces himself, and then the hero faces himself, and then he's overcome his own fears. He faces the true monster, which is within him, and then he goes back home to tell his story. But of course, in the Star Wars version, it doesn't happen until like the last movie, when we find him on this island, and we learn that all the Padawans or Jedi apprentices that he has trained all died except one, who then became the new Dark Lord. And so Luke is like, I'm not really good at this, and my fear is I just became a really crappy teacher, and I've just started this whole thing over again. And in that movie, he goes on to face that his own apprentice, who becomes the new Dark Knight, and he ultimately prevails. And then he dies, and his myth carries on, that we find through other characters tell of his great exploits. So the hero's journey is about going from normality to a place where you're challenged, you have helpers, you face your fears, and you come back again to share the story to set society free with your inner knowledge. And we all have that. We all take hero's journeys in our lives. Some are more significant than others. And this fundamental hero's journey monomyth is carried throughout all literature throughout the world. This basic story of, it's either a stranger enters the room or someone goes on the journey. And that's just how we structure stories, so that we can understand them. And through these myths, we express our societal beliefs. And of course, in the Luke Skywalker one, is that there's good and there's bad. And that if you do bad things to fight bad people, you will then become bad. That's kind of the part, the fundamental story there. But if you do good for good reasons, you will ultimately prevail, or as well as your ideas, which is Martin Luther King, that we're going to do sit-ins on the tables, so that we can eat at the restaurants. We're not going to break the windows at the restaurants to get our way. And of course, that was based on Gandhi. And so we carry these societal values in our myths.
Sir Phil, is there any questions that you wanted to ask? I know you've been
not
watching
right
some
now.
of the video.
Just taking it all in. So, a lot of information. So, not just with the monomyth, but with the caves in general. So, you think that these particular caves are really showing an ancient initiatory system, and that's the earliest evidence of this initiatory system that's basically spread around the whole world, that is included in these caves.
Exactly. That's a good point that you brought up. So that this is the earliest example that we now have of a teacher and an apprentice. But of course, that same system we have in North America, Native Americans had it, as well as in Africa and in Australia. So the older man, or in this case it's an older man, but it could be an older woman. The older man speaking to the young boy become archetypal characters. And so when we see that the man speaking to the ear of this apprentice, the story is evoked. We can see that he's telling us something, and the boy has these big, wide, red eyes, and his mouth is pursed, and his ears, you can actually see his ear open. And so we can pick stories out of this by looking at the panel. Now, the different people the different ancients that had seen this panel found different stories. And so the Saharan Tuaregs found their myth of Ameriqui the elf, the young female elephant, and the young woman. Whereas the ancient Greeks found the story of Hercules. And we can find all the pieces in the later journeys, the later labors of Hercules in this panel, including the exact places that he goes to on those labors. The ancient Egyptians found the story of the Sphinx. And so everybody looked at this, and they fundamentally found the same stories. Actually, they found the same characters, but they made their own stories in it. There's an alligator in this, or actually, I'm sorry, it's a crocodile. It's a crocodile, and the crocodile became, for St. George the Dragon Slayer, it becomes the crocodile becomes the dragon. Okay, it becomes an old myth as well. And so everybody that saw these came up with a different story, and they but we still see that we see the crocodile as an archetypal villain character, and we see the eagle helping the apprentice as well as the horse. And we also, there's another archetypal character we find this, and that is the egg. That we have two characters actually holding this egg, and the egg comes from the great auk. And so this egg, which is the singularity in the cosmos, is what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, actually, the auk laid the egg, and it goes around the circle from one year to the next. And by the way, the timing of the auk laying the egg is exactly the same as the timing of the panel. So it also supports that concept. So we have this concept. We have the story around the world of a cosmic egg, and that everything springs from the egg. We have it among the Chinese, the Vedics. We have it the Norse cultures. We have it in the Dogon. We have the ancient Egyptians, people, ancient Greece. They had it, and we can see that cosmic egg in the story on this panel. And it's actually, so the cosmic egg in this version, this 34,000 years ago, was that every year the egg hatches and the cosmos is created. Versus how we view it today is that the cosmic egg was a singularity in the cosmos, actually the beginning of everything. And the Big Bang itself was actually it came from Father Lemanter, who was a Belgian priest. And Lemanter worked out mathematically that the universe is expanding. Okay. And it was joked about, the concept was called the Big Bang, like it was an orgasmic moment, because at that time people weren't going along with the expanding universe. And the Pope at the time, Pope Pius XII, who was in line with the Nazis, came out and said, well, since there is now a scientific proof of a creation, a singular point, therefore there must have been a creator. And so scientists, physicists at the time were just like, we're not going to go down this road. And ultimately Hubble noticed that there was an expanding universe, and we then came to accept, or actually it's still divergent opinions out there, but we came to the concept of the Big Bang, which we now find in high school science books. So this concept of the Big Bang that we find in high school science books goes back to Lemanter, who had the concept in his head from all these myths he had been hearing throughout his life about the cosmic egg and the singularity, that there was a single point in the cosmos. So we can't escape from these archetypal characters, whether they be the cosmic egg, which creates the universe, or the characters on this hero's journey that is a system, in the same way as Chewie and Obi-Wan and the other characters in Star Wars do. We have these stories within us. And someone asked me once that, well, now that we have this information, we can see that how far we haven't come in the last 34,000 years. Will it change the way we see, or a path for the future? So that's a question for you guys. What do you think?
Does our salvation lie in the rediscovery of this initiatory system and the monomyth?
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering about, to kind of further on that question, these secret societies like Freemasonry, is this same system, do you think the same system exists in that and like modern day occultism as well?
Well,
Because
well,
if so, there is a rediscovery of a lot of that, and I wonder if that's not where we're going.
well, related to the Freemasons, I'm not a Freemason, but I have had Freemasons as an audience, and they talk about layers of levels of Freemason. I don't really get it, but they've all been pretty surprised about the whole thing. So what we're talking about, what we've talked about tonight, is not within the. I mean, they'll have the symbology and they'll have archetypes, but this big picture, as we're seeing it now, is not
Sure.
in the Freemason picture. But it isn't. It is in the myths from the ancient Greeks, and it's in the myths of Hercules, for example, and that the story of Hercules and the journey of his labors, it's a very old story.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes, it is.
it's beyond human time that we could possibly even imagine, because it's the characters are in this panel, and we don't chisel. Someone comes up with a story, they don't start chiseling at rocks. They start around campfires, and the Hercules story, this journey, could have been told for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, before it ended up in the rocks.
Well, I believe I see what you're getting at, is that trying to rediscover this ancient system, going back to this root, especially now as we're experiencing so many problems with the planet and our place in it, that maybe it is a good idea to try to get back in tune with nature.
So all the scientists, archaeologists, and so on that had seen this panel, millions of people, how do you tell them? Well, guys, you're just not seeing it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept, right?
Yeah.
It's and because this panel is partly about seeing the forest through the trees. It's about not counting the numbers, but seeing the story behind it. And well, last spring a paper was released out of United Kingdom, and it was widely disseminated in the press about Paleolithic artists being autistic. And I went back and read the paper. And the paper, what it said was that there's people who have so it's called local processing bias, have the ability to see embedded images or overlapping characters. So there's that painting, I believe she's in Canada, and she has the horses in the birch trees. And if someone asks you how many horses in your city, you obviously go start looking for the horses. But if someone doesn't tell you the horses, you probably never see them. And I think she does it with the wolves as well. And so she has this local processing bias that she has the ability to see embedded images. They just sort of pop. She can create them and also pop out. I have that same ability. And what the paper said is that people have this ability. Some people who have that ability have been shown to be also autistic. So the paper never actually said autistic people made Paleolithic cave art. It said people with this local processing bias have the ability to see these embedded images. So the people, if we as a society, millions of people, and we're talking all the major journals, did not see these embedded images, have we really learned that there's more than seats that can see that the eye sees not normally, and that there is neurodiversity, that all of our minds are wired differently. And just because somebody can't do this but they can do that, it doesn't mean that if you can't do this, you should be ostracized. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to whatever college, because we're tested for everything but you see in this panel. Absolutely everything. We're not tested for seeing embedded images. We're not tested for seeing the forest through trees. We're tested to count the dots. I mean, it is how we're tested to move forward in life. Yeah. And so we're shrinking the the neurodiversity gene pool throughout testing. Whereas the Paleolithic artists, they were testing for this ability to see the forest through the trees, to see beyond the red disc, and to recognize the elephant in the room. So it creates a completely different way of testing. And I've been in communication with the people who wrote the so-called autistic paper, and now they have a few panels that they can now use as an actual test with autistic and other people to see who can, without telling them what's in the image, test if they have the mind of the Paleolithic artists.
Well, and some of the speculation would be that these ancient societies actually selected people for roles, like for shamanic roles, based upon this neurodiversity, and that someone who would be selected to be a shaman would be someone who would be able to pick out patterns like that, or would have different ways of thinking than they wouldn't be looking for someone with a quote, normal, just like the rest of the group. They'd be looking for someone who seemed to have extra, perception ability.
Different perceptions, yes, and that they have the ability to see the forest, the trees, and that they have the ability to see all the stars, to see the patterns in all the stars in the night sky, so that they can tell time. That they can say, they can coordinate the stars with the sun and the moon to say, well, we're going to go fishing next week for salmon, or the elk are going to happen next month. That we need to get up and move our camp. That they have this. They also have this ability to tell a story, to project their own mythology, to captivate the audience, that people would follow that myth. And this is what's so important about myths, is that if you have a common myth, whether it be Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or democracy or communism, people follow it. And you don't have to, people who've never met before, if they share that common myth, they'll follow it. And it's when the myths separate. So you have the Sunni and Shiites in Islam, they're fighting with each other because they had a diversion of the myth. There's a separation of the myth. And so I believe that I see these images carry on for at least, I think, for 34,000 here. I can go to about 17,000 years at Lascaux. So 17,000 years we carry this intact, these myths intact in the Paleolithic art. And they survived, or they kept their societies or their culture together for so long because they shared the same myth. They looked at the same night sky. They saw the same animals in the environment, and they were a cohesive group. Tribes that they could come together and interact around this common myth. They could go off into distant lands to trade with a common myth. And so myths are so important. And in today's world, in the United States, we have this myth of democracy. Well, Bernie Sanders' myth of democracy is completely different than the Koch brothers. But we all have this common belief that we have a voice. And of course, the Koch brothers' voice is worth, was 100 million times more than my voice. Okay? and so. Yeah. But we still believe we have this democracy. If we don't believe we have a democracy, we're gonna have a revolution. Okay. But we keep that idea that if I still vote, I still carry my voice just equal ways as the Koch brothers. But it's not true, and I'm not going to start a revolution. But it's that myth, these myths that keep us together, moving in one direction. And without the myths, we'd have completely different ideas, different beliefs. And you wouldn't trust your neighbor. You wouldn't trust your own kids. You'd just be at a constant, you have no common ground for understanding, and I don't know, I'm not sure about that word morality, but the common values that keep us together. If one person believes the common value is that I can steal out of my neighbor's garden, and another person thinks that, this is my food, you need to buy it from me. Well, you gotta have, the Hatfields and McCoys type of thing going on. And so these myths are important to us, and we can look back in time to at least 34,000 years ago to see that we had these myths, and that we had these societies which told these stories, and fundamentally the same stories, or the structure of the stories, including some of the characters, as we still tell today.
Well, I find it with a lot of people even today who really who don't understand the monomyth, who don't see themselves in the myths. I think a lot of this is because they're taking everything literally, when really these myths are a way to explain your place in the world and universe, and your life and your journey. And, people see these ancient systems and they think literally. They refer to their own culture and say, oh, yes, they're like literally just worshiping these different gods, and they're not really understanding what the story is, what the underlying meaning. Which I guess when you get to the higher esoteric level in those societies, when you become an adult or you become illuminated or whatever, then you understand that these are stories to explain concepts and not literal,
Except the metaphors.
Yeah.
The metaphors made with archetypal characters, and the sets change, the names change, and what kind of animal they are, or now machines change. My daughter could come home from school, and I could, talk about saving for the winter or for a rainy day. And I could say, I was looking at the squirrels today and they're collecting nuts. They're doing that because they're going to have some hard times ahead, and they have to make sure they have food for the winter. And so we can tell metaphors, use metaphors to express things without, pointing to my daughter and say, you got your birthday money yesterday. You should put it somewhere, save it for when you actually need it, versus going out and buying, a dress today. Nothing wrong with getting a dress today. But so we express our stories through the other beings in our world, whether they be birds or squirrels, or we talked about earlier, the salmon. And they're all in that, and we express through the myths that we actually I wouldn't just tell the story of the squirrel that I talk about, the squirrel that didn't save the nuts, and the squirrel that starved through the winter, and ultimately another squirrel who did save nuts felt bad for it, and that squirrel gave to the starving squirrel, and we all had it all ended well. And so we project our own psyche into the animals in our world to create these stories. And if you look at Marvel comics and so on, we have Ant-Man, we have Batman, we have Aquaman. We commonly use animals as characters for our own modern myths, and that we're retelling the story from the past. What happens in the Paleolithic image is that the character of Hercules, he overlaps with the eagle, and he takes on, he transforms into an eagle. And then he overlaps with the horse, which is Pegasus, and he becomes a centaur. He overlaps with the dolphin to become some sort of mermaid man. And as he goes through this panel, almost throughout it, the character's face is superimposed over that of an animal. And so he gains this, as he goes around his journey, he learns from each of the animals and gains strength from them in the same way as Batman and Ant-Man and pretty much half of the gamut of the superheroes that we have. So there's something inside of us that we have this ability to pull from the animal beings in our world. The bull in the china shop, the wise owl, the woman is nesting when she's pregnant, getting ready for the child. Right. We take these metaphors of the animals and we take them on ourselves, almost as if we're not separated from these animal beings. That there's something inside of us, whether we live in an apartment building or on a cruise ship, that we recognize that we're still at one with the natural world. That we can't escape it. It's we are one with the cosmos. Whether or not we consciously want to realize it.
These are ways, Bernie, that I have never thought about before, but you are 100% correct. So all you have to do is just think a little bit about that, and that's it. We still essentially practice a form of animism, even though we say we don't.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Go to the movies. Right. We can, we look at Ant-Man and Batman and Spider-Man, and it's just natural. Yep. So it's like,
and we don't think about it, but it's true.
We don't think about it. It just blends into our consciousness, because the stories of Native Americans and the stories in Africa, where people, it's either the animal beings are the characters of the story, or the humans blend with the two, which is we also find in this Paleolithic image from 34,000 years ago.
Bernie, I want to thank you so much for coming on. There's so much more that we could talk about, and I'm sure as I get further into the book, I'll have probably a lot more questions.
Yes, thank you.
Tell people where they can get the book and where they can see all your writings and your videos and such.
Absolutely. So the book is available on everywhere there's ebooks are available. So wherever you get your favorite ebook, my webpage is beforeorion.com, and there's lots of videos and presentations and so on and images. And I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube and Pinterest as Before Orion. I use Before Orion for everything. Follow me, tweet me, retweet my stuff. And if this is a journey for everybody, and I'm on the journey, and every day I look at something and I say, how the heck did I miss that? It's just right in front of me. And it's been a lot of fun, and I've appreciated all the great people I've met on the way, including you three guys.
Well, thank you, Bernie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Feeling is mutual. Stay on the line for us. We're going to close out this section, and guys, we will be back on Conspirinormal.
All right, welcome back, everybody. As per usual, mind blown. I need to buy the book. I followed about 10% of that conversation.
Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing. What did you think about that, Sergio?
That was pretty interesting. I had watched some of the videos too, some of his lectures, and it's a lot to take in. They are very compelling as far as the images that are the carvings, and it is strange that no one had really picked him out like that before. But it was real interesting, especially the monomyth stuff. And
yeah,
I don't know exactly about a lot of his timelines and some of his alternate history stuff, but the monomyth stuff especially was really interesting.
Yeah, that's always fascinating. We're talking about Bernie Taylor, Tim. Are you familiar with him?
Sadly, no.
He did an interview not too long ago with Soraya, and we'll have this show out like next week. But yeah, he's all about this cave that's in Spain. That he sees all these figures that I think they correspond to like constellations. It's interesting stuff. It's a lot to do with animism and with animism and naturalism, because he considers himself a naturalist.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
I'm very, very interested in animism.
Yeah, definitely. Tim, welcome back to Conspirinormal, man. You're here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You're here for just a little bit. You had an announcement that you wanted to tell everybody.
Yeah. So I was self-hosting my podcast, and it was fine until people started listening. And then
is that what happened? Okay.
The bandwidth on my website keeps running out, so I had to change hosts. I don't know why in this day and age there's a such thing as bandwidth running out, but there is. And I changed to Podbean, which means the feed is going to change for Strange Familiars. So I'm reaching out to people I know who do podcasts, and hopefully we share some of the same listeners, and just trying to get the word out. Like, hey, still doing Strange Familiars. We're still doing shows, but the feed has changed. So if it doesn't pop up in your iTunes or your Stitcher or whatever, got to come look for us. We're at strangefamiliars.podbean.com, and strangefamiliars.com will point there. It just doesn't yet, but it will very soon.
Okay, so today, and actually it's telling me to subscribe again, but I do see that episode 45 is up.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it looks like on
feeds.
mine on iTunes, it looks like is that mean that it's updated?
I'm not sure, because I'm running two feeds at the same time now.
Okay.
So until the website points to Podbean, there's sort of two feeds running, and I'm kind of at the mercy of my web host to change that for me, because I don't know. It's just the tech end of stuff. I really don't know.
Yeah. So you wanted to come on here and come on a couple other shows and just let people know that's where it's going to be.
Yeah. If you don't see us come up in your regular feed, just look for us either at strangefamiliars.com or look for us on Podbean, strangefamiliars.podbean.com, or you might have to just go back and resubscribe to the new feed.
So I highly recommend Strange Familiar. So let's talk a little bit about what you've been talking about on there lately. What's been the most interesting subject for you?
Well, I tell you, and it's the last thing I was on Conspirinormal talking about, I think, is the Flannel Man.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that if there's any more Flannel Man stories.
Well, they mentioned, I guess one of the guys on last podcast on the left has a Flannel Man encounter, and he mentioned that on the show, and also mentioned Strange Familiars. And since then, things just blew up. Like I get enough Flannel Man stories where I could do a dedicated Flannel Man podcast now, and mostly because of them.
I have a question about Flannel Man. Does he have a nice Pendleton, or is it just some of that Walmart crap?
Well, I tell you what, we're going to make Strange Familiars flannel shirts with Flannel Man patches on them. So
nice.
They're probably going to be discount. They're probably not going to be super nice high-end flannel shirts.
Oh.
So what's one of the latest stories?
Oh, let me see. I'm trying to think. So many of these Flannel Man shirts are sorry. So many of these Flannel Man stories are people just see them. And that's the weird thing. They're just people are seeing the same thing. But I tell you, one of the most interesting aspects that's coming up lately is I keep asking people this because my wife was the first person I knew who saw this Flannel Man person. And she saw it in her bedroom in her parents' house. And she had also seen these black dogs. She called them hellhounds, I think. Hellhounds or demon dogs? Which were they? She called them demon dogs. And these red-eyed black hounds she would see there too. So randomly, another person who saw Flannel Man brought up that they'd seen black dogs. Well, now I've started asking everybody I talk to and interview about Flannel Man if they've seen these black dogs, and it's not even 50%, but it's a high enough percentage where it's like really, really interesting. A lot of people have seen them both. So I don't know what that means, but it's just another common factor. So that's been some of the accounts that have come up lately where I just ask people, because I don't pre-interview people if I don't have to, and I save that question in reserve. So it's usually like the last thing I ask, and people are shocked. You get these shocked silences with these Flannel Man witnesses, and they say, "Yeah, I have," and then they'll tell the black dog story. So why they're seeing them both, I have no clue, but it's just another interesting aspect of the phenomenon.
So they're not seeing them necessarily both together, but they'll have an incident where they see a black dog and then an incident where they'll see Flannel Man.
Right. Yeah. There is one I have recorded where they saw him at the same time, but for the most part, it's they'll see him at completely different times.
Are you going to do a Flannel Man book? Is that next?
It's not next, but it's coming. Yeah. I'm writing a Flannel Man book. It might just be all encounters because I don't know at this point. I don't know what to say about the guy. I'm hoping that poking at this phenomenon will stir something up in a way, and we'll get some answers. Because really, to a fault, everyone I talked to is like, I had no clue anybody else had seen this. I had no clue this was a thing, and we barely did when we started talking about it. I knew my wife had seen it, and I'd seen something on an internet forum. Someone, years and years ago talking about it. So I knew it was a thing, but once we started talking about it and people started, contacting us like, I've seen this. And like I said, especially after that, they mentioned it on last podcast, it's been bananas, the number of Flannel Man reports I've gotten. So we'll see what happens when we start poking around. Maybe more people will see him or maybe he'll sit down for an interview.
It's probably just Ren Collier anyway, doing his out of body experiences. But that's the thing, though. Is it happening because now through your podcast and others, people are now more aware of it, so it starts happening more?
Done made a
Are we
tulpa.
seeing this effect kind of happen in real time?
For the most part, people are saying I saw him 5 years ago or something like that, or when I was a kid or something like that. So I recorded one last night. It was a very recent sighting. I think the lady saw him, or I say him. They're not all describing the exact same person. What's in common is the flannel. So some people, he's tall. Some people he's got a beard. Some people he doesn't. Some people the lady last night said he was shorter and stockier, but she had seen him in June, I believe, and that's the most recent report I've gotten. Most of them are like I said, like 5 years ago or 2 years ago I saw him, or when I was a kid I saw him.
I was listening to your show yesterday, and you had the guy on there from Sweden, and he had a lot of interesting spooky stories. And one of those was something he encountered in the woods. Could you relay that?
The Skogstra. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And yeah, so he his grandmother owned a camp for kids, and he was camping out and heard his name being called from the woods when everyone else was asleep, which is
Sir Phil's shaking his head. He's like, "No way, dude."
super creepy.
Sir Phil.
No. That's in folklore. I mean, that'll pop up around Bigfoot stuff. That'll pop up, in Fey encounters. It pops up, in different places in folklore. This, somebody's name being called from the woods. In fact, our most recent episode, the Devil's Creek, a dip in Devil's Creek, we have some recordings of someone's pet being called from the woods. We actually have the actual recordings.
Whoa.
Yeah. They're just incredibly fascinating story. But so this name's being called from the woods. It happens. It's a thing. But of course, the kid just sat there and didn't do anything, which is probably good. He just kind of hunkered down in a sleeping bag. And then he said the next day he was in the house on the property, got the feeling that he was being watched. He looked out the window and saw, like he said, a very young girl, like 13, 14 years old, I think he said, by look. And once she caught his eye, she waved at him. And then he said he saw her turn and walk into the woods. But when she turned around, she just blended right into the forest. And the folklore of the Skogsra says that they have hollow backs or backs that look like hollowed out trees. So it's seems like what he saw sort of confirms with some of the folklore over there.
And I think he said that she was wearing like a nightgown, kind of.
Yeah. He said like a slip, kind of white slip of a dress, I think.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
That is so unbelievably creepy, dude. And is James still doing co-host duty with you?
Yeah. James had like a life change. For a minute there, he was working like 3 jobs, and
oh, wow.
He actually has a real, like, it's not, a lot of people have, quote, girlfriends in Canada, unquote. But but James actually has a real girlfriend in Canada, and he's been driving up to see her a lot. So, he was on the latest Patron episode, and I think the episode before that he was on. Oh yeah, he was on the Skogsra episode a little bit. So it's basically, when we can get together, and I think his schedule's freeing up, so he should be on more coming up.
And he saw something weird coming back.
Yeah, and that was really strange because I was literally like editing the Skogsra episode, and he called me up. He's like, dude, I saw something weird. Give me a call. So I called him up, and I was literally editing the episode when I called him. And he's like, I saw this thing. It's like shaped like a man, but it just blended in with the trees. It was green, and but it was a different color green than the trees, but it looked like it was trying to blend in. It was really weird. I mean, he describes it a lot better than I do here on the episode. But I'm hit with this kind of synchronicity where I'm like, well, that sounds a lot like what this guy in Sweden described when the woman turned around. She just kind of blended in. So it was good timing, I guess, on his part if he was going to see something weird. So it paired nicely with the Skogsra story.
Any more developments with the Beyond the Seventh Gate?
I am writing a follow-up. That'll be my next book. It's actually mostly done. I believe it's going to be called Don't Look Behind You. Josh Cutchin wrote the foreword for it, and in doing so, he gave me a lot of really, really good suggestions. So I thought I was done, but Josh had some excellent suggestions, which I think I'm going to add. So I have a few rewrites to do, and then hopefully it'll be out before too long.
You've been going to a place called Site 7?
Mm-hmm.
which I know is a place that I think is like on private property.
Yeah.
But you've had some weird stuff happen out there too.
There's a whole catalog of weirdness there. I mean,
Wow.
we've seen stuff and nothing was, so we would see like what we would call flashes, and then our listeners would say, oh, I've seen flashes of light too. It wasn't flashes of light, it was flashes of movement, things that were so quick that we saw something move by, like run by the trail, but we couldn't tell what it was. We couldn't say, we couldn't even make a guess. It was big and it ran across the trail. That's all we could say. And it looked white, which is very interesting because a lot of everything that people was reporting out there is either white or gray. But I would go there and hike alone and stuff, and kind of, it's easy to put this stuff sort of in the maybe category in your mind, and if you see something there and you're kind of freaked out, or you're there at night and you hear something weird, give a few days and for me anyway, I put a few days and I'm ready to go back. I'm not scared to go there alone, or at least I wasn't. But we went there in February of this year, and I think our episode's called "Lights in the Woods." You can hear it pretty much real time what we were seeing. I had been told by another guy who was going there that there were lights there in the woods, and he said they were eye shine. I didn't believe for a second they were eye shine, but
Bigfoot eye shine.
Yeah, that's what he was
Right.
claiming. I mean, we do have like Bigfoot reports in the area and stuff, and that's one of the things we're possibly working with. But the way these lights are, they don't look like eye shine. They don't look like reflection at all. They look like LEDs in the woods. So I saw them. I saw these LEDs, these lights that look like LEDs. They look like Christmas lights or something. And I'm looking at them like, these are in no way eye shine. Like, this is something self-illuminated. It looks like a man-made light. And in fact, at this point, I'm trying to, reason like, okay, what's out there that I didn't notice before? Then the lights started to move. I'm like, all right, that's weird. They're moving. And then they started to change colors, very subtly, not blinking like Christmas lights, but they would sort of just kind of morph from one color to another. They started out as kind of a whitish blue, like I said, kind of like a bright LED light. Then they would go like blue, then green, then they might go to orange, and then back to white, very, very slowly. Like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Still did not think they were eye shine. No way. They're just weird lights. At this point, I was like, these are weird lights. And I'm still trying to figure out, like, how to reason them. Like, is this some kind of light display or something somebody has out there to mess with people? Or, like, what's going on? Well, the fellow that was with me is another James. He's not the James that usually co-hosts with me. Just happens to be named James as well. He had a green laser, very powerful. It's like I think it's rated 10 miles or something. This thing will shoot. And I said, put that laser in that light, see what happens. Hit that light with the laser. And he did. And when he would hit these lights, they would turn red and they would go out every time. Now, he had to move the light around a little bit because they're awful ways in the woods. You can't just peg it right away. But when he'd hit them, you could tell because they would turn red and they would go out. It would kind of aperture out. They kind of, like I said, it was like an aperture closing almost. They would go from red to black and they'd go out. And a few minutes later, they'd light up again, back to white. And now I'm like, this is like, I don't know of any man-made light that does that. So that's the point where I went from, okay, there's a lot of maybes around here, but this is no maybe. Like, this is, three of us were standing there watching this happen, confirming with each other. Like, did you see that? Yeah, I see that, And the fact that he would hit these lights again and again with that laser, and every time they turn red and go out, really bizarre. Again, I specifically remember turning to the other guy who said they were eye shine and going, I don't think it's eye shine, dude. I think there's some kind of weird light. Well, within probably a couple months of that, I was listening to, it might have been a month even, I was listening to an episode of Sasquatch Chronicles, and a witness on there was describing Bigfoot eye shine, and he said, you're not going to believe it, but it changes color. Huh. And he described basically what I saw. Now, he didn't have a laser. He didn't describe them, hitting it with a laser, but he's describing it changing color. And he said, it's really bizarre. And he said, I know it's it's uncomfortable to talk about, but this is what I saw. Now, this guy was in Texas, and I believe he saw the lights in the silhouette of a creature. So here's someone who's actually seen it. And at that point, I went, well, I don't, maybe Jeff, the guy said it was eyeshine all along. I mean, maybe he's right. Maybe that's what it is. I really don't know. And even in that, I'm just using that as a working theory because I heard someone, completely unrelated describe what I saw. And then he said it was Bigfoot eyeshine too. It's whatever it is. It's weird. It's really weird. I went back during the day and looked at the area and it was on the side of a hill. So, I thought maybe some kind of atmospheric, the light's refracting through the atmosphere in some weird way. And it only looks like what we're seeing, but it was the side of a hill. We weren't looking through a hill. There's no possible way. So at that point, that area became very, very real for me. And I don't know if I'm going to hike there alone anymore.
Wow, Tim, that's crazy, man.
Yeah. And I, I still can't officially say it's eyeshine, but like I said, it's just one of the working theories I have. It's better than anything else, I guess, or as good. I'll say it's as good as anything else I have as to what they could be at this point.
Well, thank you, Tim. That's a nice little teaser for when we get you on next time.
Yeah. I'm ready to come on anytime. I love Conspirinormal.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. We love you, man. Strange Familiars is one of my favorites.
Thanks, dude.
For sure. Stay on the line with us. We're gonna close out the show with you. So,
alright.
Rob, you can tell everybody. Tell everyone, Tim, where they can find Strange Familiars.
Strangefamiliars.com. If for some reason that hasn't ported over yet, strangefamiliars.podbean.com. But hopefully, real soon, strangefamiliars.com is going to point to the Podbean, so that'll make it simple for everybody.
Excellent. Now I'm going to give Rob the part that he really loves to do.
All right. If you want to help support the show, you can go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal. We've got various tiers there. We do bonus episodes. It helps us evacuate squirrels from the studio and, keep equipment up to date and all those fun little things. If you don't want to subscribe, you don't want a monthly payment come out, you can do a one-time donation through our website at conspirinormal.com. And if you want to support the show, but you don't want to spend any money doing it, a great way to do that is a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen.
Excellent. Any closing thoughts? I think everybody's faded tonight. Surfy almost died today, Tim. So,
oof.
Yeah, he's had a rough day,
but he's still here.
He's still here. He's dedicated, man. All right, guys. Join us next time. We are going to do a show with Ren Collier again. He's coming back. We're going to do about space communism.
The space communism spectacular episode.
Which I'm pretty much turning that all to you, Sir Phil. That's going to be pretty much all you.
Yes. It will be fun.
It will be. All right. Thank you guys for listening, and we will be back next time on Conspirinormal.
You like that?
I love that. That was awesome.
Nice.